Katie Sullivan pressed her face against the cold glass window of the observation deck. Below her, the biggest auction in the galaxy was about to begin. The Nexus Prime space station buzzed with excitement as beings from every corner of known space gathered in the Great Hall. Rich aliens wore their finest clothes and showed off their wealth with gold and jewels that sparkled under the bright lights. She had saved every credit for 3 years just to buy a ticket to watch this event. Most people could only dream of seeing the Galactic Exotic Companion auction. Here, the rarest and most powerful creatures in the universe were sold to the highest bidders. But the real prizes were the dragons. Dragons were not just pets or animals. They were partners for life. When a dragon bonded with someone, that person gained amazing abilities. Some could fly without ships. Others became stronger than 10 normal beings. A few could even see the future. Every major leader in the galaxy had a dragon companion. It was the ultimate sign of power and success. Katie watched as the first dragon was brought onto the stage. The crowd went silent. The creature was huge, with scales that shone like red metal and eyes that burned like stars. Its wings spread wide enough to cover a small building. When it roared, the sound shook the entire station. This magnificent fire dragon comes from the volcanic worlds of Pyrrhion, the auctioneer announced. Tested combat rating of 9.7 out of 10. Capable of melting through starship hulls with its breath alone. The bidding started at 1 million credits. Katie watched the numbers climb higher and higher. 2 million. 5 million. 10 million. Finally, a tall alien with purple skin and 4 arms won with a bid of 15 million credits. The dragon looked proud as it walked off with its new owner. More dragons followed. Each one was bigger and more impressive than the last. Ice dragons that could freeze entire armies. Lightning dragons that moved faster than light. Shadow dragons that could become invisible and walk through walls. The prices kept going up. 20 million. 30 million. One sold for 50 million credits. Katie felt sick watching the numbers. She made about 5,000 credits a year working on salvage ships. She could never afford even the cheapest dragon here. But she could not stop watching. Dragons were the most beautiful and powerful beings she had ever seen. And now, the auctioneer called out, we have our final dragon of the evening. A small cage was wheeled onto the stage. Inside was the smallest dragon Katie had ever seen. Its scales were pale white, almost gray. Where the other dragons had stood tall and proud, this one sat hunched in the corner of its cage. Its wings drooped at its sides like broken feathers. This is Ember, the auctioneer said. His voice had changed. He sounded tired and a little embarrassed. Age unknown. Origin world unknown. Combat rating 0.3. Gasps filled the auction hall. 0.3 was almost nothing. Most trained guard dogs rated higher than that. The dragon has failed every strength test we have given it, the auctioneer continued. It cannot breathe fire, ice, or lightning. It cannot fly more than a few feet before getting tired. Medical scans show no diseases or injuries. It simply appears to be weak. The crowd began to mutter and whisper. Some people laughed. Others shook their heads in disgust. Katie could hear comments floating up from below. What a waste of space, Why did they even bring that thing here? Someone should put it out of its misery. The dragon seemed to hear every word. It curled up even smaller in its cage, trying to hide from all the staring eyes. Bidding will start at 100,000 credits, the auctioneer announced. Silence filled the hall. Nobody raised their hand. 50,000 credits. Still nothing. 25,000. A few people started getting up to leave. They had seen enough. The auctioneer looked frustrated. 10,000 credits for this dragon. Surely someone wants a dragon companion, even an unusual one. Katie watched as the dragon lifted its head slightly. For just a moment their eyes met through the glass. The dragon's eyes were not weak or stupid. They were sad but also wise, very wise. Katie felt something strange in her chest, like a warm hand touching her heart. 5,000 credits, the auctioneer called out. This is a dragon, people. The rarest creatures in the known universe. Nobody moved. The dragon looked around the hall one more time, then put its head down on its front legs. 1,000 credits, the auctioneer said quietly. Final call. Katie found herself standing up. Her hand was in the air before she knew what she was doing. We have a bidder, the auctioneer called out, sounding relieved. 1,000 credits to the young lady in Section C. The entire hall turned to look at Katie. Thousands of aliens stared at her with shock and confusion. Some pointed and whispered. Others laughed out loud. What is she thinking? Humans really are stupid. She just wasted her money on a broken dragon. Katie felt her face turn red, but she did not put her hand down. Below on the stage, the dragon had lifted its head again. It was looking right at her. Going once, going twice, sold to the human for 1,000 credits. The hammer came down with a loud bang. Katie had just bought a dragon. 20 minutes later, she stood in a small room behind the auction hall. The dragon sat quietly in the corner, still looking tired and sad. A security guard had unlocked its cage and left them alone. "Well," Katie said softly, "I guess we belong to each other now." She walked slowly toward the dragon, being careful not to make any sudden moves. When she was close enough, she reached out her hand. "My name is Katie. I heard them call you Ember. Is that okay with you?" The dragon looked at her hand for a long moment. Then, very gently, it pressed its nose against her palm. The moment they touched, Katie felt warmth flow through her entire body. It was not the burning heat of fire or the cold shock of ice. It was something else entirely. Something that felt like coming home after a long journey. Ember's eyes closed, and for the first time all day, the dragon looked peaceful. Katie smiled. "I think this is going to work out just fine." Outside, she could hear the crowd leaving the auction hall. They were all talking about their powerful dragons and making plans for conquest and glory. None of them gave a second thought to the weak little dragon that had been sold for almost nothing. They had no idea that they had just witnessed the beginning of the most important partnership in galactic history. Katie's salvage ship was not much to look at. The hull had dents and scratches from years of dangerous work. The inside was small and cramped with just enough room for one person to live, but it was home, and now Ember would share it with her. The dragon explored the ship slowly, sniffing at every corner and surface. Katie watched nervously. She had read everything she could find about dragon care during the long trip back from the auction. Most of the advice seemed wrong for Ember. Dragons need to show dominance, one book had said. Make sure your dragon knows you are the master from day one. But when Katie tried to give Ember firm commands, the dragon just looked confused and sad. It would try to obey, but its movements became clumsy and uncertain. Dragons respond to strength, another guide had explained. Show your dragon that you are powerful and it will respect you. Katie tried raising her voice and standing tall like the book suggested. Ember backed away and curled up in a corner, making itself as small as possible. After 3 days of failed attempts, Katie threw all the books into the recycling unit. "This is not working," she said to Ember. "Maybe we need to try something different." She sat down on the floor near the dragon, but not too close. Ember watched her with those wise, sad eyes. "I know everyone thinks you are weak," Katie said softly, "but I don't think that's true. I think you are just different." She began to talk about Earth, her home world. She told Ember about blue skies and green forests. She described how humans had learned to work together instead of fighting each other. She explained how her species had become strong not through conquest but through cooperation. "We used to think the strongest person should be the leader," Katie said. "But we learned that the smartest person or the kindest person or the person who could bring others together was often a better choice." Ember listened to every word. Slowly, over the following days, the dragon began to move closer during these conversations. Its posture became more relaxed. The sad look in its eyes began to fade. Katie started asking Ember questions even though the dragon could not speak human languages. But she learned to read its body language. A tilt of the head meant yes. A small shake meant no. Different movements of its tail showed different emotions. "Do you like flying?" Katie asked one day. Ember tilted its head, then looked toward the window. "Would you like to try flying outside the ship?" The dragon's eyes brightened. Katie put on her spacesuit and opened the cargo bay doors. She watched as Ember spread its wings and flew out into the void. The dragon was not fast like the racing dragons from the auction. It was not graceful like the show dragons, but it flew with purpose, exploring every part of the ship's exterior. Katie noticed that Ember seemed to be studying the ship's design, examining the hull repairs and the engine configurations. When they landed on a small moon to collect salvage, Ember proved its worth in unexpected ways. The dragon could sense which pieces of wreckage contained valuable materials. It could spot hidden dangers that Katie's scanners missed. Most importantly, it seemed to understand the technology they were working with. "You are not weak," Katie realized one day as she watched Ember carefully extract a delicate piece of equipment from a crashed ship. You are just built for different work. Their first real test came 2 months later when they received a distress call from a mining colony on the edge of civilized space. Pirates had attacked the settlement and were demanding tribute. The colonists had sent out calls for help, but no military ships could reach them in time. Katie knew she should stay away. Her salvage ship had no weapons, and Ember was supposedly the weakest dragon in the galaxy. But the colonists had families, including children. She could not ignore their plea for help. When they arrived at the colony, the battle was already underway. 3 pirate ships circled the settlement like hungry wolves. The colonists had 2 defense dragons, both trained for combat according to traditional methods. But they were losing badly. The defense dragons attacked with raw fury, breathing fire and trying to ram the pirate ships. But the pirates had shields and weapons designed to counter such tactics. They stayed out of range and picked off the defenders with laser cannons. Katie watched from her ship's bridge as one of the defense dragons was badly wounded. Its partner, a tough mining foreman, was shouting commands that the dragon could barely follow in its injured state. "We have to help," Katie said to Ember. The dragon looked at the battle, then at Katie. It made a series of complex gestures with its wings and tail. Katie frowned, trying to understand. "You want to talk to the other dragons?" Ember nodded, "But how? You can't reach them from here." The dragon moved to the communication console and placed one claw on the speaker controls. To Katie's amazement, she heard sounds coming through the radio. Not human words, but dragon calls. Ember was somehow using the ship's communication system to reach the other dragons. The effect was immediate. The 2 defense dragons stopped their wild attacks and began to listen. Ember's calls became more complex, almost like a conversation. Then the defense dragons changed their tactics completely. Instead of charging straight at the pirate ships, they began to work together. One dragon created a distraction while the other circled around to attack from behind. When the pirates tried to counter, both dragons moved in perfect coordination to trap them between the colony's defensive weapons and their own attacks. The pirates found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. What had been a simple raid became a deadly trap. Within minutes, all 3 pirate ships were either destroyed or fleeing for their lives. The colonists cheered as Katie and Ember landed near the settlement. The 2 defense dragons approached Ember with what looked like respect. Their partners, the mining foreman and a security chief, stared in amazement. "How did you do that?" the foreman asked. "My dragon has never fought like that before." Katie looked at Ember, who was communicating with the other dragons in their own language. "I think Ember showed them how to think instead of just fighting," she said. Word of the battle spread quickly through the local systems. Most people dismissed it as luck or exaggerated stories, but a few began to take notice. The human and her weak dragon had done something that traditional military thinking said was impossible. Back on her ship, Katie sat with Ember as they traveled to their next salvage job. "I'm starting to understand," she said. "You are not weak. You are smart. Really smart. You can see patterns and solutions that others miss." Ember made a sound that Katie had learned meant agreement. "The other dragons were bred to be weapons," she continued, "but you were meant to be something else. A teacher, maybe? Or a strategist." The dragon moved closer and rested its head on Katie's leg. For the first time since the auction, Ember looked truly content. Katie stroked the dragon's pale scales, thinking about what they had accomplished. The mining colony was safe. 2 other dragons had learned new ways to use their abilities, and she was beginning to see the potential that everyone else had missed. "We make a good team," she said softly. Ember's response was a gentle rumble of agreement. Outside the ship's windows, the stars stretched endlessly in all directions. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was beginning to take notice of the salvage worker and her unusual dragon. Neither Katie nor Ember knew it yet, but their actions had attracted the attention of some very powerful people who did not like what they represented. People who would soon force them to prove themselves in ways they never imagined. But for now, they were content to travel together through the void. 2 outcasts who had found in each other exactly what they needed. The message arrived on Katie's ship 3 months after the mining colony incident. The seal on the transmission made her hands shake. It was from the Dragon Masters Council, the most powerful organization in the galaxy. Katie Sullivan and the dragon called Ember. The message began. "You are hereby summoned to appear before the grand tournament. Recent reports of your activities have raised questions about the legitimacy of your bond. You have 30 days to present yourself at the tournament grounds on Valdris Prime. Katie read the message 3 times before the words sank in. The grand tournament happened only once every 10 years. It was where dragon partnerships were tested and ranked. Winners gained tremendous prestige and political power. Losers were often banned from keeping their dragons. "They want to take you away from me," Katie said to Ember. The dragon pressed against her side, offering comfort. Over the past months, their bond had grown stronger. Katie could almost feel what Ember was thinking, and the dragon seemed to understand her emotions perfectly. The journey to Valdris Prime took 2 weeks. During that time, Katie researched everything she could about the grand tournament. What she learned made her more worried with each passing day. The tournament had 3 trials. The first was a test of raw power, where dragons demonstrated their combat abilities. The second was aerial combat between dragon pairs. The third trial was shrouded in mystery. The rules said only that it tested the true nature of the bond between dragon and companion. No human had ever participated in the tournament. No dragon like Ember had ever been entered. Katie began to wonder if accepting the summons had been a terrible mistake. Valdris Prime was a world of floating islands connected by bridges of solid light. The tournament grounds occupied the largest island, with arenas and training facilities that could hold millions of spectators. When Katie's ship landed, she felt overwhelmed by the crowds and the grandeur of everything around her. Other competitors were already there, preparing for the trials. Katie saw dragons that made the ones from the auction look small. Battle dragons with armor-like scales and claws that could cut through metal. Speed dragons that moved so fast they were barely visible. Psychic dragons whose eyes glowed with mental energy. Their companions were equally impressive. Military commanders from the most powerful worlds. Corporate leaders who owned entire star systems. Royal families whose bloodlines went back thousands of years. They all stared at Katie and Ember with expressions ranging from amusement to disgust. "Look what the council dragged in," she heard one commander say to his massive war dragon. "A human girl and her pet lizard." "This is an insult to the tournament," said a corporate executive whose ice dragon could freeze a lake solid with one breath. "They should never have been allowed to enter." Katie tried to ignore the comments, but she could see that Ember was affected by them. The dragon's confidence from their recent successes began to fade. By the time they reached their assigned quarters, Ember was acting like the sad, withdrawn creature from the auction again. The first trial began the next morning. Each dragon had to demonstrate its maximum power output in front of the assembled judges and spectators. Katie watched as dragon after dragon performed amazing feats. One fire dragon melted through a wall of solid steel 10 feet thick. A lightning dragon generated enough electricity to power a small city. A void dragon made a section of the arena completely disappear, taking it to another dimension entirely. When Ember's turn came, the arena fell silent. The dragon managed to produce a small flame about the size of a candle. The flame flickered weakly for a few seconds, then went out. The judges looked at their measuring devices and shook their heads. "Power output negligible," the head judge announced. "Score 0.4 out of 10. The crowd erupted in laughter. Katie felt her face burn with embarrassment, but she kept her expression calm for Ember's sake. The dragon looked crushed. The second trial was even worse. Aerial combat pitted dragon pairs against each other in a series of mock battles. Ember and Katie faced off against a speed dragon and its pilot, a young alien noble who clearly enjoyed showing off. The battle lasted less than 30 seconds. The speed dragon moved so fast that Ember never had a chance to react. When the trial ended, Katie and Ember were lying in a heap at the bottom of the arena while their opponent circled overhead in victory. "Pathetic," the alien noble called down. "I've fought training dummies that put up more of a fight." That night, Katie sat with Ember in their small room. The dragon had not eaten anything since the trials began. It just lay on the floor staring at nothing. "I'm sorry," Katie said softly. "I should never have brought you here. These people are right. We don't belong." Ember lifted its head and looked at her. In the dragon's eyes, Katie saw something she had not expected. Not defeat, but determination. The dragon moved to the window and pointed outside. In the distance, they could see the arena where the third trial would take place tomorrow. Ember made a series of gestures that Katie had learned to interpret. "You want to try the last trial?" she asked. "Even after what happened today?" Ember nodded firmly. "But we've already lost. Everyone knows it. They're just going through the motions now. The dragon came back to Katie and pressed its nose against her hand. The warm feeling that always passed between them seemed stronger than usual. Katie felt some of Ember's determination flow into her. You think the third trial will be different? Another nod. Katie looked out at the arena. Okay, we've come this far. We might as well finish what we started. The third trial began at dawn. The competitors and their dragons were led into a vast chamber beneath the main arena. The room was empty except for a single pedestal in the center. On the pedestal sat a crystal sphere that pulsed with inner light. This is the trial of true understanding, the head judge explained. For thousands of years, this test has remained unchanged. Dragon and companion must work together to unlock the secrets within the sphere. Most pairs never solve even the first layer. The record for completion is held by Grandmaster Zephon and his ancient wind dragon, who solved 7 layers in 4 hours. Katie stared at the sphere. It looked like a puzzle, but one more complex than anything she had ever seen. Patterns of light moved through the crystal, forming shapes and symbols that changed constantly. You have 6 hours, the judge continued. Begin when ready. The other competitors approached the sphere confidently. Their dragons examined it with enhanced senses while their companions used advanced scanning equipment. Katie heard them discussing strategy in loud voices, each pair certain they could break the previous record. Katie and Ember hung back, watching the others work. After an hour, the first pair gave up in frustration. After 2 hours, half the competitors had quit. The remaining pairs grew more desperate, pushing their dragons to use more power and trying increasingly complex approaches. Katie noticed that Ember was not looking at the sphere at all. The dragon was watching the other competitors, studying their methods with intense focus. What do you see? Katie asked quietly. Ember made a gesture toward the sphere, then toward the frustrated competitors. The meaning was clear. They were all trying to force their way through the puzzle. You think there's a different approach? The dragon moved to the sphere and sat down in front of it. Instead of trying to manipulate the crystal or probe it with energy, Ember simply watched the patterns of light. Katie sat beside the dragon and watched too. Gradually, Katie began to see what Ember had noticed. The patterns were not random. They followed a rhythm like music made of light. But every time someone tried to force a solution, the rhythm changed, becoming more complex and harder to follow. It's responding to aggression, Katie whispered. The harder they push, the more it resists. Ember nodded and placed one claw gently on the surface of the sphere. The light patterns slowed down, becoming easier to read. Katie put her hand next to Ember's claw, and the patterns slowed even more. Working together, they began to understand the sphere's language. It was not a test of power or dominance. It was a test of harmony. Dragon and companion had to think as one, moving in perfect synchronization with the crystal's natural rhythms. Layer by layer, the sphere opened to them. Each solution revealed new patterns, more complex but also more beautiful. Katie and Ember worked in silence, their minds connected in a way that went beyond words. Around them, the other competitors stopped their own attempts to watch. The judges stared in amazement as the sphere responded to the gentle touch of the human and her weak dragon. Impossible, someone whispered. They're past layer 8. No one has ever gone beyond 7. Katie barely heard the comments. She was lost in the dance of light and thought that she shared with Ember. The sphere was showing them visions now, glimpses of the ancient beings who had created this test, memories of dragons and companions who had tried and failed over thousands of years. When the 10th layer opened, the entire chamber filled with brilliant light. The sphere rose from its pedestal and split apart, revealing a core of pure energy that pulsed with the heartbeat of the universe itself. 11 layers, the head judge said, in a voice filled with awe. They solved 11 layers. The trial ended with Katie and Ember sitting peacefully before the reassembled sphere. Around them, the other competitors and judges stood in stunned silence. News of Katie and Ember's victory spread across the galaxy, faster than light-speed communication. Within days, every major news network was covering the story of the human girl and her weak dragon, who had broken a record that stood for centuries. Katie found herself invited to speak at universities, military academies, and government assemblies. Everyone wanted to understand how she had accomplished the impossible, but not everyone was happy about her success. The first sign of trouble came when Katie tried to return to her salvage work. Docking stations that had always welcomed her ship suddenly had no available spaces. Suppliers who had sold her equipment for years claimed they were out of stock. Other salvage workers, who had once been friendly, now avoided her completely. "They're scared of us," Katie realized as she and Ember sat in their ship, orbiting a space station that had just denied them landing permission. "Our success threatens everything they believe about dragons." The Dragon Breeders Association was particularly hostile. For generations, they had made huge profits selling combat dragons to wealthy buyers. Their entire business model was based on the idea that dragons were weapons that needed to be controlled and dominated. Katie's methods suggested something very different. If dragons were actually partners who worked best when treated with respect, then the traditional breeding programs were not just wrong, they were harmful. The association could not allow such ideas to spread. Corporate leaders who owned military dragons were equally concerned. Their power and status came from having the strongest, most aggressive dragons. If strength was not the most important quality, then their carefully built hierarchies might collapse. The political response was swift and coordinated. The Galactic Trade Commission began investigating Katie's business licenses. The Starship Safety Board questioned whether her salvage ship met current regulations. The Immigration Authority demanded proof of her citizenship from Earth, even though she had been working in galactic space for years. But while the establishment tried to shut Katie down, something unexpected was happening among ordinary dragon companions across the galaxy. Videos of her tournament victory had been watched billions of times. People began trying her methods with their own dragons. The results were remarkable. Dragons that had been considered mediocre or difficult suddenly began showing new abilities. Military units reported improved coordination between dragon riders. Research teams found that their dragons could solve complex problems when treated as thinking partners rather than tools. Dr. Lisa Park, a xenobiologist on the research station Helios 7, was one of the first scientists to document these changes. Her dragon, a small Earth dragon named Boulder, had always been considered useful but not exceptional. After watching Katie's interviews and applying her techniques, Boulder began displaying intelligence that amazed the entire research team. "Boulder is not just following commands anymore," Dr. Park reported to her colleagues. "The dragon is actually contributing ideas to our research. Yesterday, Boulder identified a pattern in our data that none of our computers had detected." Similar reports came from across the galaxy. A freight captain named Rick Chen found that his transport dragon could navigate asteroid fields with unprecedented precision when they worked together as a team. A farming family on New Terra discovered that their agricultural dragon could predict weather patterns days in advance when they listened to its input. The underground movement grew stronger as word spread through informal networks. Dragon companions shared techniques and experiences through secure communications channels. They called themselves the Partnership Alliance, and their motto was simple: "Together we rise." Katie became the unofficial leader of this movement, though she never asked for the role. Wherever she spoke, crowds gathered to hear about the new way of working with dragons. She established training centers on frontier worlds, far from the reach of the major powers, where people could learn partnership techniques safely. The establishment's response grew more desperate. Traditional dragon breeders began spreading rumors that Katie's methods were dangerous. They claimed that treating dragons as equals would lead to rebellion and chaos. Military leaders warned that soft approaches would leave the galaxy defenseless against threats. When economic pressure and propaganda failed to stop the movement, the Dragon Masters Council decided on more direct action. They called for a special tribunal to review Katie's tournament victory, claiming that new evidence suggested she had cheated somehow. The hearing was scheduled to take place on the neutral world of Haven Prime, with representatives from every major power in attendance. Katie knew it was a trap, but she also knew she could not refuse without looking guilty. "They want to destroy us publicly," she told Ember as they prepared for the journey to Haven Prime. "If they can prove we cheated, they can dismiss everything we've accomplished." Ember responded with the confident gestures Katie had learned to interpret as determination mixed with something else. The dragon was not afraid. If anything, Ember seemed eager for the confrontation. The tribunal was held in the Hall of Justice, a massive building that could hold 10,000 spectators. Every seat was filled with dragon breeders, military commanders, corporate executives, and government officials. The media coverage was intense, with reporters from every major news network in the galaxy. The proceedings began with accusations from the Dragon Breeders Association. Their spokesman, a stern alien named Vex Thorn, presented what he claimed was evidence of cheating. No dragon has ever solved more than 7 layers of the trial sphere, Thorn declared. The idea that this weak creature could suddenly solve 11 is absurd. They must have used some kind of technological assistance or prior knowledge of the puzzle. Katie stood to respond, with Ember at her side. The hall fell silent as she began to speak. "We did not cheat," she said simply. "We succeeded because we approached the trial differently than anyone before us. Instead of trying to force our way through the puzzle, we listened to what it was trying to teach us." "Impossible," Thorn shot back. "Dragons are animals. They cannot think at the level required for such complex problem-solving." Katie smiled. "Would you like us to demonstrate?" Before anyone could object, she walked to the center of the hall where a replica of the trial sphere had been placed for the hearing. Ember followed, moving with quiet confidence. "This is highly irregular," the chief magistrate protested. "But necessary," Katie replied. "If you truly believe we cheated, then we should not be able to repeat our performance." The hall buzzed with excitement as Katie and Ember approached the sphere. This time they had an audience of thousands, all watching their every move. Security scanners ensured that no hidden technology could assist them. Katie placed her hand on the sphere while Ember touched it with one claw. Immediately the crystal began to pulse with light. Working together with the same gentle harmony they had shown at the tournament, they began to unlock the sphere's secrets. Layer after layer opened to them. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the patterns of light danced through the crystal. Some spectators began to understand what they were seeing. Not domination or force, but true partnership between 2 minds working as one. When the 11th layer opened and the sphere filled the hall with brilliant light, many in the audience were moved to tears. They had witnessed something beyond mere skill or training. They had seen the birth of a new understanding of what the bond between dragon and companion could become. Vex Thorn sat down heavily, his accusations crumbling before the evidence of his own eyes. "How?" was all he could say. Katie turned to address the entire assembly. "Dragons are not weapons or tools or trophies. They are intelligent beings with their own thoughts, feelings, and abilities. When we treat them as partners instead of possessions, amazing things become possible." She gestured to Ember, who had grown visibly during their demonstration. The dragon's scales now gleamed with inner light, and its posture radiated confidence and wisdom. "Ember was never weak," Katie continued. "The dragon was just waiting for someone to recognize its true nature. All of our dragons are waiting for the same recognition." The hall erupted in discussion as the implications of Katie's words sank in. If she was right, then everything the galaxy believed about dragons needed to be reconsidered. The tribunal ended without a formal verdict, but the result was clear. Katie and Ember had not only proven their innocence, they had demonstrated their methods before the most powerful people in the galaxy. The old ways of thinking about dragons had been challenged and found wanting. As Katie and Ember left the hall, they were surrounded by dragon companions who had watched the demonstration with growing excitement. These people represented the future, a galaxy where dragons and their partners worked together as equals, creating possibilities that neither could achieve alone. The revolution had begun, and there was no turning back. The partnership between Katie and Ember had lit a fire that would spread to every world, every system, every corner of known space. The age of dragon domination was ending, and the age of dragon partnership was about to begin. 5 years after the tribunal on Haven Prime, the galaxy had transformed in ways that nobody could have predicted. The demonstration that Katie and Ember performed in the Hall of Justice had been broadcast to billions of worlds, sparking a revolution in how people understood dragon partnerships. The changes started small but grew quickly. Dragon companions who had watched the broadcast began experimenting with Katie's methods in secret. When their dragons responded with increased intelligence and cooperation, word spread through underground networks. Within months, the Partnership Alliance had members on every civilized world. Traditional dragon breeders fought the changes at first, but economics forced them to adapt. Customers no longer wanted aggressive combat dragons that had to be controlled through fear and dominance. Instead, they sought dragons that could think, problem solve, and work as true partners. Breeding programs that had focused on size and strength for thousands of years suddenly had to consider intelligence and emotional stability. Katie, established the Dragon Partnership Academy on a small moon in the frontier systems. The facility started with just a few buildings and a handful of instructors, but it grew rapidly as demand for partnership training exploded. Students came from across the galaxy to learn the techniques that Katie and Ember had pioneered. The academy was unlike any educational institution in galactic history. Instead of lectures and textbooks, students learned through direct interaction with dragons. The curriculum focused on communication, empathy, and mutual respect. Traditional ideas about dominance and control were not just discouraged, they were actively unlearned. Rachel Wells, a former military dragon commander, was one of the Academy's first graduates. She had spent 20 years believing that dragons were weapons that needed strict discipline. Her dragon, a powerful storm dragon named Thunder, had always been difficult to control, requiring constant vigilance to prevent rebellion. "I thought Thunder hated me," Rachel admitted during a graduation ceremony at the Academy. "I spent so much energy keeping the dragon in line that I never tried to understand what Thunder actually wanted." After 6 months of partnership training, Rachel and Thunder worked together with a harmony that amazed everyone who knew them. The dragon's storm powers, once chaotic and dangerous, became precise tools for weather control and atmospheric research. "Thunder was never trying to rebel," Rachel explained. "The dragon was trying to communicate. I was just too proud to listen." Stories like Rachel's became common as the Academy's influence spread. Military units began reporting unprecedented coordination between dragon riders. Scientific expeditions found that their dragons could contribute insights that human researchers missed. Even corporate leaders discovered that dragon partners could improve efficiency and solve business problems in unexpected ways. The success of partnership methods created pressure for change at the highest levels of galactic government. The Dragon Masters Council, once the supreme authority on dragon-related matters, found their traditional power structure crumbling as people stopped seeking their approval for dragon partnerships. Eventually, the council was forced to officially recognize partnership techniques as legitimate. They established new certification programs based on cooperation rather than dominance. The ancient rank systems that had classified dragons purely by combat power were replaced with assessments that measured the quality of the bond between dragon and companion. Ember became the most famous dragon in galactic history, but the small dragon seemed to take the attention in stride. Katie often found reporters and officials staring at Ember in amazement, expecting to see some obvious sign of the dragon's legendary abilities. What they saw instead was a calm, thoughtful creature who radiated wisdom and quiet confidence. "People expect Ember to be huge and powerful," Katie told a group of Academy students. "They want to see fire breath or lightning or some kind of spectacular display. But Ember's real strength has always been the ability to understand and communicate." That understanding had grown far beyond what anyone thought possible. Ember could now communicate complex ideas not just to Katie, but to other dragons across vast distances. The dragon had become a teacher, helping newly bonded pairs learn the principles of partnership that Katie had discovered years earlier. The partnership revolution extended beyond just dragon relationships. The same principles that worked with dragons proved effective with other exotic companions. Telepathic crystals, sentient plants, energy beings, and countless other species began forming true partnerships with their human and alien companions. Katie found herself invited to address the Galactic Senate, the highest governmental body in known space, the chamber that had once echoed. With speeches about conquest and military dominance now hosted, discussions about cooperation and mutual understanding. "The old ways taught us to see strength as the ability to control others," Katie said to the assembled representatives. "But true strength comes from the ability to bring out the best in those around us. Dragons were never meant to be our weapons. They were meant to be our teachers." The Senate voted unanimously to establish the Interspecies Partnership Institute, with Katie as its first director. The Institute's mission was to study and promote cooperation between different species throughout the galaxy. The facility became a center for diplomatic breakthroughs, scientific discoveries, and cultural exchange that would have been impossible under the old system of dominance and control. Ember's role in these developments was often subtle but always crucial. The dragon served as a bridge between species, helping to translate not just languages but entire ways of thinking. Conflicts that had lasted for generations were resolved when Ember helped the opposing sides understand each other's perspectives. The most dramatic example came during the Zephyrian crisis, when two alien races nearly went to war over mining rights in a contested system. Diplomatic efforts had failed completely, and military fleets were gathering for what promised to be a devastating conflict. Katie and Ember traveled to the disputed system as part of an emergency mediation team. While human and alien diplomats argued about laws and treaties, Ember communicated directly with the companion creatures that both sides had brought to the negotiations. Through these companion creatures, Ember discovered that the conflict was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. Each race thought the other wanted to destroy the system's unique crystal formations, which held deep spiritual significance for both cultures. In reality, both sides wanted to preserve the crystals while carefully extracting common minerals from areas that held no special meaning. Within hours of Ember's intervention, the two races had not only resolved their conflict, but had agreed to joint stewardship of the system. The crystals would be protected as a shared cultural heritage site, while mining operations would provide resources for both civilizations. Without Ember, we would never have understood what the conflict was really about, the chief mediator reported to the Galactic Senate. The dragon saw through all our political positions to the actual concerns that mattered to both sides. As the years passed, historians began to recognize the true significance of what Katie and Ember had accomplished. They had not just changed how people thought about dragons. They had introduced an entirely new model for relationships between different species, one based on mutual respect and shared growth rather than dominance and exploitation. The galaxy's most prestigious universities offered courses in partnership theory. Military academies taught cooperation tactics alongside traditional combat strategies. Corporate training programs included modules on interspecies communication and collaborative problem-solving. Children who grew up during this transformation took partnership methods for granted. To them, the idea of forcing a dragon into submission seemed as barbaric as the ancient human practice of slavery. They formed bonds with their companion creatures that were deeper and more productive than anything the previous generation had thought possible. Katie often reflected on how far they had come from that day at the auction when she had impulsively bought a dragon that nobody else wanted. Ember, once considered the weakest dragon in the galaxy, had become the catalyst for the greatest social transformation in recorded history. "You changed everything," she said to Ember one evening as they watched the sunset from the Academy's main terrace. Students and their dragon partners moved through the gardens below, practicing the communication exercises that had once seemed impossible. Ember made the gentle rumbling sound that Katie had learned meant contentment. The dragon was no longer the sad, withdrawn creature from the auction. Ember had grown into something magnificent, not through force or dominance, but through understanding and love. Together they had proven that the galaxy's definition of strength was fundamentally flawed. True power did not come from the ability to control others, but from the wisdom to help them become their best selves. It was a lesson that would guide galactic civilization for generations to come. As Katie looked out at the thriving academy, she knew that their work was far from over. There were still worlds where the old ways persisted, still species that had never experienced true partnership, but the foundation had been laid, and the revolution they had started would continue long after they were gone.